See, there is a very specific type of person who will have zero unread emails, a meticulously categorized camera roll, and an apartment that looks like a ghost just moved out. But if you watch them walk through a busy, heavily decorated store, you will notice their shoulders physically rising toward their ears. The music is too loud, the racks are too close together, and the sheer volume of choices feels like actual physical static. People think minimalism is an aesthetic. They think you spent hours curating the perfect beige life so you could post a perfectly clean desk on the internet. But it actually has almost nothing to do with interior design. It has everything to do with bandwidth. You aren't trying to make your life look like a magazine. You're trying to lower the volume of reality. The rest of the world is perfectly fine existing in a constant state of visual noise. They treat visual clutter like background scenery. You don't. You treat it like a background app that is slowly draining your battery. Creating a completely blank space isn't a sign that you are withdrawing from the world. It's the exact mechanism that allows you to tolerate it. Honestly, the physical toll of just existing in a modern room is completely ignored. You sit down to send a simple two-sentence email. It should take 30 seconds. But there's a coffee cup on the edge of the desk. There's a stack of mail from 3 days ago. There's a charging cable looped over the lamp. You try to type, but your eyes keep snagging on the edges of the objects. You literally cannot form the sentence until you physically remove the cup and push the mail into a drawer. People call that procrastination. They call it being easily distracted. They don't understand that every single object in your visual field acts like a background application silently draining your processing speed. A landmark 2011 fMRI study from the Princeton University Neuroscience Institute mapped exactly what happens in the brain when it is surrounded by visual clutter. They looked at extraneous cognitive load. What they found was that multiple stimuli present in the visual field actually compete for neural representation. They physically restrict your processing capacity. You aren't making it up. The mess is literally making it harder to think. You aren't optimizing for a minimalist aesthetic to impress anyone on the internet. You're stripping away the visual noise so your brain can actually run the primary program without crashing. You don't want a pretty room. You want your energy back. But here is the twist. This mechanism doesn't affect everyone equally. For some people, the baseline filter is just built differently. Think about standing in a crowded restaurant. 3 different conversations are happening at the tables next to you, a waiter drops a tray in the back, and the music is a bass-heavy thud. Most people's brains automatically turn that into a low hum. They tune it out. You don't. You hear the specific cadence of the conversation to your left. You track the pitch of the music. You feel the bass in your actual teeth. Dr. Elaine Aron's decades of research on sensory processing sensitivity shows that roughly 15 to 20% of the population has a central nervous system that simply processes environmental stimuli more deeply. The biological threshold for what constitutes too much is fundamentally lower. You don't leave the party early because you hate your friends. You leave because your nervous system has reached maximum capacity and is threatening to shut down. You need a blank wall the way someone who is drowning needs the surface of the water. An empty room isn't a stylistic choice, it's a biological recovery zone. But it actually gets weirder, because this need for a cleared space doesn't just happen when things are loud. It spikes violently when things go wrong. Yeah, picture it. It's 11 p.m. on a Tuesday. Work was an absolute disaster, or maybe a relationship is quietly splintering. You aren't crying. You're suddenly standing in the kitchen with a heavy-duty trash bag, violently throwing away old Tupperware and expired spices. You're stripping the counters bare. I still don't fully get why throwing away a perfectly good spatula feels like solving a massive life crisis, but it does. Researchers look at this through the lens of compensatory control theory. A major 2009 study by Aaron C.K. and colleagues demonstrated that when people experience a loss of control in one abstract area of their life, they immediately seek out concrete, physical actions to reestablish agency. When the macro world feels terrifying and unpredictable, throwing away 10 bags of clothes provides a micro hit of power. You're using physical decluttering to manage emotional chaos. Look, you could argue this is just a form of avoidance, a way to feel productive without actually fixing the core problem. Sure, clearing the counter doesn't fix the relationship, but when everything inside feels like it is unraveling, controlling the exact geometry of the objects on your desk is sometimes the only way to stop the bleeding for the night. Here is the part society doesn't want to admit. It goes beyond the immediate relief of a clean counter. It digs right down into how you construct who you are. Most people build their identity by accumulating layers of stuff. They keep the concert ticket stubs, the ugly sweater their aunt bought them, the boxes of childhood trophies. Consumer psychologist Russell Belk called this the extended self back in 1988. The theory is that our possessions literally become a part of our identity. If they lose the box of souvenirs, they feel like they have lost a piece of themselves. Minimalists have quietly recognized how incredibly fragile that is. You look at people surrounded by heirlooms and panic starts to rise in your chest. The daily maintenance of all those physical memories looks exhausting. You just don't want your past held hostage by a piece of cardboard. When you refuse to keep the sentimental clutter, people assume you are cold. They think you are unsentimental. They assume you don't care about the past. You're actually building an identity that is entirely bulletproof. You're constructing a self that does not shatter if a box gets lost in a move or a house floods. You're proving to yourself that you are whole without the inventory. You're protecting your peace. Society thinks you are just cleaning. Look, people will keep walking into your apartment and making the same tired jokes about when the rest of your furniture is arriving. Let them. They don't understand the physical relief of an empty corner. They are still playing the game where whoever dies with the most aggressively decorated living room wins. You dropped out of that game on purpose. You aren't cold because you threw away the nostalgic t-shirt. You are fiercely protective. You realize that every object is a contract for your attention, and you simply stopped signing bad contracts. That isn't being broken. That is having an impossibly high standard for what gets access to your nervous system. You traded their loud, fragile identity for a quiet, bulletproof one. But you have to be honest with yourself eventually. Is your empty room a place where you finally find peace, or is it just the only environment you can currently control? You already know the answer. Subscribe if you felt that.